Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello and welcome to Program Insight in B News English. Dear viewers, today's conversation is again focused on Iranian war, or we may call it Middle Eastern crisis, but on the economic side. So the Friday is the seventh day of the Iranian war. The joint attacks from United States of America and Israel are continuing, but of course, Iran is also retaliating. And in return, Iran is hitting some of the American bases in the Middle East. That has created a very severe crisis of oil and gas supply. Economy of the Middle Eastern countries, which used to be the hub of the global economies, are severely disrupted. Tourism, aviation, oil, gas, traveling, meetings, and whatnot. So in today's conversation, we would like to examine that what are the economic aspects of this particularly supply chain management of oil and gas? What are the alternate options? To discuss this, we are fortunate to have with us very renowned economist, global economist, Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. Very warm welcome to Program Insight, Dr. Khaqan Najeeb Sahab.
Thank you for having me, Mateen bhai.
It's a pleasure to have you in our program. So I would like to begin with this. Of course, we are not discussing the military angle, but this seventh day of the Iranian war has severely impacted the regional and global economies. And Qatar has closed its gas production. So Strait of Hormuz is closed. Over there is of course, war going on. United States says that it is attacking Iranian Navy. Iranian defense says that it is countering the American attacks. But due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the supply of oil and gas, particularly LPG, is disrupted globally and regionally. And some of the countries which are affected, including Pakistan, India, then Japan, then China, then a number of other countries. So what do you think in the prevailing situation? What are the alternate options available to get this oil and gas supply restored?
So if you think about how the war has progressed over the 7 days and how consequently the oil price has progressed,
Exactly.
you will be quite clear as to what has actually transpired. Brent was at about $70 when the conflict had not begun. And today, when we are discussing this, Brent's around $90. That's a 28% jump only in the price of Brent that we are seeing. Secondly, the insurance coverage of whatever is being transported. And thirdly, the price of transportation itself, I think, is probably
very high. Exactly.
So these are three, impacts in terms of the pricing. And then, of course, the curtailment of the quantity that is flowing through Straits of Hormuz is about 25% of the world's oil. And 20% of people keep forgetting is the LNG, which is also equally important for not only the economies of the Middle East, but the economies of the East Asia, India, Pakistan,
Exactly.
so on and so forth. And especially, never to forget that China gets a lot of oil from the Strait of Hormuz. So this is overall scenario as to what has happened. The oil supply shock, the exogenous shock to all these economies means heightened inflation. So that has ramifications on the pocket every day. In these countries, the oil price changes on a daily basis. It's like the revision is so quick. So the impact on the pockets of the consumer, on the transportation, on overall the economy is pretty quick, and it's passed on pretty quickly. So the inflationary impact then cascades into the daily lives of the people. And that, of course, impacts the global economic growth forecast that we do. Let's say it was 3.2% forecast for the global growth. So I'm sure something will get shaved off. In US, for example, when the year had begun, the recession fears were around 30%, and they had actually tapered off as inflation tapered off. Fed started cutting rates. But I was
Mm.
just talking to one of the chief economists of one of the big banks, and in their forecast, they are now reviewing that drop from 30% recessionary forecast to a slightly higher probability. But here's the catch, which no one will tell you. The April futures are telling a much higher story of Brent. But if you look at the December futures,
Mm.
they are at $69. So the markets still perceive this to be a conflict, which is, as I say, a confined conflict in both in terms of how the sphere is, and largely aerial in nature, and then not beyond the 4 to 6 week horizon which the US has talked about as they moved into the conflict. So this is how the whole scenario is. But also for the oil importing countries, there is a there is a difficult position. For example, Pakistan has, let's say, when the conflict started, 28 days of oil, which is
Reserves.
petroleum and diesel reserves, right? So these countries don't have what we call strategic reserves. Just to share
Mm.
with the viewers, what does a strategic reserve mean? Japan, for example, has 254 days of strategic reserve. Now that's a
Mm.
totally different ball game when you get into that. Now, Bangladesh, us, even India for that matter, and that's why I think they have gone back to Russia and gotten, around with the US to move on the Russian oil. So for countries like Pakistan, who have 28 days and now are down to, like, let's say 23, 24, and LPG 15 days, crude 10 days, the severity of the challenge is how to keep the economy afloat, and make sure that we don't run out of reserves. So then they would have to buy at a higher premium. That's one go. Second is how to do demand management. That is the way forward for these countries. For example, China already said they don't want to export crude. So that's kind of, managing the supply side and, keeping intact whatever they have. Then, for countries, trade and logistic shocks, and they still have to go through the system, which means your export basket. And the world is like a global village in terms of exports. China is the factory of the world. Pakistan does leather, garments, textiles. So when you have countries like that who are dependent on export proceeds, the
Mm.
exports, of course, can get slower. And for countries whose macro stability is dependent on exports, and secondly, very important, Mateen Saab, is the fact the remittances that countries like
Mm.
us or the Philippines get, their remittances are
One of
much
the
higher.
highest one, exactly.
And
Mm.
similarly with India. And the Middle East population is 10% local and 90% expat.
Mm.
And if there is a drop in remittance for Pakistan, for example, at $42 billion, or for the other countries at $80 billion, they take a couple of $1 billion hit, or we take a couple of $1 billion hit. That translates into what a balance of payments
Horrible.
challenge for some, and maybe harsher for some countries like us who are in a fund program. And countries which are in a fund program have very severe kind of macro modeling. And these numbers, if they vary by a billion or 2 billion, when you're expecting, let's say, $1 billion as your current account, and you vary by a billion or 2 billion, that's a 100% jump in your current account. So that has to be managed. So the channels are oil, inflation, remittances, trade. And then there is another channel. There are the countries all the time looking for investments in the world, some doing the investments and some looking forward to what they call FDI. Pakistan's again one of them, India is one of them, Vietnam's one of them. All these countries are looking for FDI, right? So the FDI story is, of course, dependent on certainty. That is the,
Exactly. Economic
that's
stability. Exactly.
absolutely. So macro stability, economic stability, political stability, but
Mm.
this all translates into a certainty where I make an investment over the 5 to 10 year horizon. And if I have to make that, then obviously a region where surrounded by a conflict, things become uncertain, and the investor tends to pull out in the sense of time delays. This may be a 4 to 6 week war, but there is a time delay in the kind of investment that I would be thinking, whether in South Asia, East Asia, or anywhere else. And also, so this is the impact coming to, these kinds of countries. The Middle East itself, let's look at the Middle East. It
True.
probably gets a very, very high percentage of its food basket from
Hmm.
abroad. Let's say
Exactly.
these
Food imports.
disruptions, right? These disruptions were to continue, you could see kind of a discomfort there. And this dislocation, actually, the Middle East has never seen. This would be something new, which logistically they would have to then plan for and handle. Then, water, their water, somewhere 42%, somewhere 90% comes from desalination of the seawater. So let's say if there was some hit, and God forbid, some of the water disruptions were to occur, these could have, a difficult challenge for them. And then something that we haven't talked about, which is, the fertilizer prices have gone up because fertilizer is gas dependent, right? If Pakistan was to withdraw in demand management on the fertilizer bit, of course, if similarly other countries, which I'm sure are doing the same thing, then the fertilizer price rises. If the fertilizer price rises, that's impact on the food inflation. And, all over the world, food security is prime, especially for bigger countries like Indonesia, Pakistan, Philippines, India. These are vastly populated countries, and managing a food basket is probably a prime concern for the leaderships in these countries. So that's also something to think about. And of course, security spillover risks, bordering nations of Iran, Pakistan's one of them, are always there. So it's a very geopolitical tightrope. And then countries have defense pacts. Pakistan's got a defense pact with Saudi Arabia. You have to maintain a certain decorum of what you have just signed. So there, Pakistan, treads a tightrope. And Pakistan's really done very well on economic and foreign diplomacy, good relations with U.S., Saudi pact, Middle East, good call. China has always been a bellwether friend. So across the board, so to maintain and get out of that conflict, still maintaining that kind of high diplomatic position is another challenge. And then domestic politics. Wherever oil prices go up, I or you go to the petrol pump and pay a higher, domestic politics gets disturbed. In Pakistan, there is a high levy on petrol, which is 85 rupees out of the 270, 80 rupees of what people pay. If that can't go down because you're in a fund program and the prices were to rise 10 to 20%, that's a heavy toll on the people of Pakistan already, who've seen very, very high inflation. And generally around the world, inflationary trend has been strong over the past 3 years after COVID. And that's why state banks, central banks have had to rise rates. And US, we were seeing rates coming down. So how does that play out? So what we have covered all over is that the repercussions of a continued conflict, which is not only spread now, are large, not only for the region itself, but for the other nations, also for the global economy. But moving forward, the best way forward, of course, is the following. Demand management for countries which import oil is a must. And now there are very, very clear models. COVID's been very helpful in teaching us
Exactly.
these models. How to control mobility, how do you control people's behavior, how do you ensure that you don't waste your energy. The work pattern changes from work from home, energy efficiency, public transport, and then the market discipline, which means there is no hoarding, there is no smuggling, there is no cross the border movement. So all these things are the short term fixes. The medium term fixes for countries are the following: that energy security is your macro stability, because energy has a deep impact on what you call not only the immediate buffers you hold in terms of central bank reserves, the balance of payments challenge, the fiscal position, but they have longer term ramifications in terms of what you hold in terms of the export basket and what you hold in terms of the overall investment basket. Then there is a silver lining for some of the South Asian nations. Let's say some people were to flow back, maybe bring in their capital back. Maybe there was in the coming years in the Middle East, and the growth is more predominant in the South Asian region, whether that's Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, India. Then these countries would tend to benefit. Pakistan has a huge population. I think we get about more than $8 billion in terms of remittances. So we have a heavy indulgence in terms of the human resource that we have abroad. Maybe some of it would also bring in some capital back. So, that kind of opens up another opportunity for the country right now. As Vietnam has been able to capture the East Asian movement of manufacturing. Pakistan may be able to do the same. So the country should first be doing demand management, then should be doing energy security, which means building up reserves. I've always said that on the government table many a times. I repeat this, that energy conservation immediate, and then when you move on, what you do is energy security, which is building up of reserves. As we say, 3 months. As economists, we always feel that 3 month cover on the central bank reserves is a must. In a similar manner, I've always said that a 3 month cover on the energy security, and then eventually, countries who have solar, who have water resources, some have coal, some have LNG, some have what you call wind corridors. So they must be thinking about indigenous or indigenization of energy, which is, and a lesson that's very, very important beyond this is how important macro stability, which means a low inflationary environment, good buffers at the central bank, low balance of payments deficits, low fiscal deficits are important for countries. Because when there is an exogenous shock of the kind that we've just hit, these buffers are the ones which come in handy, whether you have to buy, crude at a higher price, or LNG. For example, right now, Pakistan was buying LNG at $25-30 million a cargo. Today, that cargo, if it's $60-70 million, the call that you have to make is that you actually do import or you do demand management. So those are the difficult choices that the countries have to make, and the other countries also. Some have moved to other kinds of oil. Some will ramp up their local production, and that's something to do. Some will do a lot of demand management and get away with that. This is the menu. But overall, slower global growth. If the war lingers on, my best case scenario here, and I'm an eternal optimist, is that in coming weeks, and even as we speak, there would be some diplomacy, some backdoor, talks. Diplomats are always, engaged. Countries like Pakistan at the center, who've done this kind of work before, or others in the Middle East, must be talking and having conversations. And sometimes when we hear about eventually everything coming on the table and getting solved. When that happens, of course, that remains open. We've gone through the first week, let's say 4 weeks tops or 5 weeks tops. The problem is that in that time period, some signals have to come back so that the energy supply from Qatar, for example, closure will take another couple of weeks to ramp up, come back. So the whole normalization process gets underway. I think that's the whole dynamics that's playing out. We all hope, we all pray, better sense prevails across all major players, all stakeholders, and we move to a position where sitting on the table, that indication comes. The other indication you can take is from the stock markets of the world. The markets have corrected, but the markets have remained resilient also. So generally, the perception would be, as I said, you look into the future of Brents a couple of months down the road, they're much lower than what the immediate is looking. That that these clouds will clean up, and as we've seen confined conflicts in terms of both regionally and in terms of the days, or maybe in this time the weeks. This will come to a closure. Some signs of that are always there when people are talking about what they would like or what they would not like. Those are signs of kind of showing movement towards what we call a resolution of the issues.
Do you think Russian oil will be an option, keeping in view the American sanctions? Today, there was a news that one of the subsidiary of a Russian company based in Germany, United States have lifted sanctions on it, and that is an oil company. So for these all countries from South Asia to Southeast Asia and other countries in the region, is Russian oil is an option?
So what we've heard from the US is that they have lifted the Indian sanction also, and India is probably allowed for a specific time period. Your thought process on that is probably in that direction, and that's probably true. Look, you have to come up with contingencies when there are shocks or exogenous shocks and shocks of the kind which kind of disrupt supplies. Not beyond Russia, if I was to think, I think Venezuelan oil would be ramped up and would be a part of the supply. So that's another chain that I'm thinking about. US has probably set in motion that as well. Then we have also heard the third position is that OPEC Plus has also lifted its delivery, and you are going to now seeing the Red Sea route being used more and more. So that is the third option. So all these things combined would probably find their way. Now, how much of the distorted or disturbed demand can they meet remains to be seen. And that's a number that, again, because right now, of course, every country has, a couple of weeks at the minimum and then, a couple of months at the max. But, let's see how that plays out. And then Strait of Hormuz, how long does that remain? Maybe a signal at some time where there is certain opening there. I recently, just in the past 2 hours, was hearing that there is an LNG ship that is going to try and pass through there. So let's see how that kind of works out. This is, I think, a ship from Qatar. So let's see how that kind of works out. So, because these are also signals from countries which are in the conflict of certain allowances, which kind of then create space for further diplomacy, right? I mean, that's how diplomacy kind of works. So we remain open on those kinds of things. But in the end, of course, I mean, everyone's got to come on the table and discuss and decide and show flexibility, or show kind of what we call a way out of the situation, and better sense to prevail and friends to jump in and see how that option could be. There are always options on the table to move forward.
What are the options available for Pakistan? Of course, as I said, Saudi Arabia has assured safe supply route to Pakistan. What options are available in Pakistan, as both LNG and petroleum products are in high demand and engine of the growth?
So, Mateen sir, my view on this is dual, and this is pure economic view. So let's start with what you can do yourself, and then move on to the exogenous or the external help that you need. So internally, and I've written about this, and if you follow my Twitter account, I write, kind of a Substack, a very detailed account. So here's my view on that, and I'm going to read. Energy demand management framework is something that Pakistan should put forward, and put forward very quickly. I'm sure authorities are very smart and they know. And the first part of that framework is work patterns, which means work from home, which means hybrid working, which means days off, which means staggered timings, which means virtual meetings, which means school closures. We have Eid festival coming up. We can, have a longer holiday, and maybe shift part of the June, July holidays, which are summer holidays across the world, back. So this is your first line of defense. Your second line of defense is mobile management, or what we call mobility management. And that comes from the fact that, you reduce quotas of, let's say you have a quota of 200 liters of petrol or gas. Let's say I was to reduce it to 100, your behavior would change and your mobility would change. You would carpool with me, we would drive together. So things that we've done in COVID in Pakistan was like the benchmark of doing these things. I was with the government, and I mean, we did it superbly, and came out really, really with a feather in our cap. So the third thing that we must do is what we used to do when we were energy deficient, which was conservation protocols in offices, factories, private, public, all areas, and which are pretty simple, which are laid down, which we can do when we have to ramp up in the evening. For example, we would not have to use the diesel, we would not have to use the fossil fuels, because we would not be ramping up anymore, because we would be conserving. So that's and then all over public behavior, the discretionary movement that we do, can we really curtail that? We can. And I used to give this example. I'm an Australian trained economist. He used to come on TV and he used to say that I've walked so many miles and I've eaten 5 vegetables and 3 fruits in the day. So that's like kind of setting an example of how life should be. So, so in a similar manner, I would probably be thinking leadership saying that, instead of 3
austerity.
We took once a trip, and that kind of, we did all the virtual meetings. That kind of, sets people, especially the big force in the executive, and then the private sector and the people at large, that if I want to go have an ice cream, or if I want to go to dinner, or if I want to shop 4 times a week, let's curtail it to 2. Let's do mobile shopping. There are many things that you can do, and in the end, what I always say is that create a market discipline. This is the time for the regulators to make sure that what you said, hoarding is not done, so that the petrol pumps keep a normal behavior. Secondly, you do the pricing right. In countries like Pakistan, pricing was done monthly. I remember, pushing this to 15 days. We've pushed it to 15. Now we are pushing it to 1 week. Why? Because again, the behavior, if the prices were to go up, behavior changes. So you want to pass on something that you import and do not produce at all to the public. Of course, here the argument would be that you also want to reduce the levies at this kind of time. You could have a conversation with the IMF, and you could do that. Then within this market discipline, what becomes important is the policymakers, the regulators, the OMCs, the oil marketing companies, and the petrol distributors and retailers to have great coordination within them. I know government forms committees, but those committees in those rooms, that's enough. But the job in these countries of implementation and coordination is much deeper, right? So if these 5 players have to coordinate, then they should be coordinating very clearly. At times, we hear different kind of estimates of even what the storage capacity is at present. But, largely everyone knows what it is. So this kind of market discipline. Let's say if we were to show this and then couple it with the Red Sea movement from KSA. KSA, of course, we have a very different and a very deep and a very close relationship. So if the Red Sea port of Yanbu, I think we call it, if we can be assured supply, I don't know what that price would be, because then that judgment would have to come that are we buying at a higher price because we use the Platts price, but that would have also increased more than 20%. So, let's think through that, what the Red Sea can offer to us. But in this, the logistics, the shipping delays, and the high prices still create pressure both on the stocks and the external account. So management of that would become important. And lastly, government must, look at the expenditures, curtail those expenditures, because your taxes that you're going to get in the next couple of months may be lower than what you would expect in the normal course of things. And so you want to curtail expenditure so that your fiscal hit, your expenditure minus your taxes minus your expenditure, doesn't go too much negative, so that you stay with the fund. And lastly, managing the remittance flow, managing the import flow becomes crucial at this stage. You want to maintain a discipline on your current account. It can maybe enlarge, but by a manageable. Always remember, if at 85 if dollars, if we were taking a hit of $200 million a month. That would mean that in the next coming months, $1 billion. If this was to go to 85, 90, or 100 for the next couple of months, it would probably be 250 to 300 million. That would mean north of $1 billion. So that would have to be, part of the current account, or have to be financed. So all these things, these are manageable tasks. It's not. We are in a comfortable position in terms of the buffers on the both fiscal buffers on the what I call the external $16 billion of reserves. I mean, these are comfortable, not something Pakistan would like. North of 20 billion is something I think Pakistan would be maintaining, because we have 12-month payments also to UAE. We owe $2 billion, which are being reprofiled every month. So that's of concern to me. So making sure that these all stay in place. And then the last thing, IMF engagement stays in place. There are talks going on right now. That engagement must go on. But, and we can have a separate conversation someday on that. I've always maintained it. I say this again, I've written about it in the Business Recorder in length, that Pakistan needs to rethink its engagement with the IMF, the kind of program we have of higher taxes. And, this is a good time to have that conversation.
Last quick one sentence. We are at the close of the program. This Ukrainian war had already created huge economic crisis. Europe and global economies were affected. Do you think they have taken into consideration the economic consequences and this negative fallout of this war on Middle Eastern, European, global economy? The American
war is something which is hard to macro model or predict, or really think about it in those terms. But let's say if I was to believe that this was to be a 4 to 6 week thought process, let's hope that the best case scenario is that it's even shorter, or we move into somewhere there, and we move into the kind of agreement on all sides, and good sense prevails across the conflict area.
Thank you so much indeed, Khaqan Najeeb Saab, renowned economist, for very insightful conversation on the economic impact of this Iranian war. And dear viewers, till our next program, goodbye and Khuda Hafiz.